Welcome everyone to another episode of the S.O.A.P. I'm Daniel and I'm joined by our regular Kav. Today we're going to introduce Corey, who's been a member of the community for a while. You've probably seen him posting on the Reddit forums. He's reached out to us, said he wanted to be part of one of our shows, so we thought we'd give him a trial. Corey, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. I used to do YouTube for a little bit, sort of maybe 2-3 years ago. I started listening to the S.O.A.P. maybe 6 months ago and really enjoyed the podcast, that sort of stuff. And obviously I've known you for a while, Dan. So I felt like, I knew what the topic was today and felt like I suited it well and thought I'd reach out and see if I could, get involved.
Perfect. Well, hopefully going forwards, maybe get you on a few more episodes or see how we go. This episode, we're going to tackle Ready Player One. In particular, the recent film has finished at the cinemas here now, but that's probably the perfect time to grab everyone who's either seen the movie or thinking about grabbing it when it does go direct to DVD. Now, as with any kind of movie review or anything like that, there could be a couple of spoilers. So for those who don't want any information at all, obviously this isn't the episode for you. We will, of course, try not to talk about the endings or anything like that, but some of the major plot points will be covered in this episode. So let's start this off. I'm going to throw it over to you, Kav. You've read the book. Tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Yes, Ready Player One is a science fiction novel by Ernest Cline, who's an American author. The book came out in 2011. I was lucky enough to read the book a couple of years ago and even took the opportunity to listen to the audiobook as well at the same time, which I quite thoroughly enjoyed. The book itself is set in a dystopian future in the 2040s. The movie specifies that the year is 2045. It's about a person named Wade Watts and his search for an Easter egg in a virtual reality game. Whoever wins that Easter egg will basically inherit the game's creator's fortune and run the whole virtual game, basically, which everybody in the whole entire world plays. The book was actually quite popular, and as has the movie been quite well received by the audience as well as the critics. Ernest Cline, I believe, sold the rights to the novel rather back in 2010. So yeah, the book was so popular before it was released. There was a bidding war with the publishers, and the authors decided to sell the rights to Crown Publishing Group, which is a division of Random House. That was sold back in 2010. Here's a fun fact, I suppose, in that the audiobook, which, as I said, I also listened to, was narrated by Will Wheaton. Some of you might know Will from Star Trek series, The Next Generation. He's a narrator for quite a number of audiobooks, but the fun fact is that although he narrated the book, he also appears in the book itself. So it's quite an interesting thing that happened, and we'll talk about that a bit more later on.
And I guess that's where the hype came from, Kav. The book had all these accolades and quite a big following once it did get published, and that movie's really expanded that audience. Now, Corey, you've told me multiple times how much you love the movie. Maybe you can tell everyone more about the movie-specific side of things.
Yeah, of course. Like you mentioned 1,000 times that this is honestly one of my favorite movies, especially this year. Came out in early 2018, so it hasn't been out for an overly long time, but enough time that the fanatics of it would have gone and seen it already. Obviously, you know that you've got a quality movie when you have Steven Spielberg directing it, which obviously is one of the most well-known directors and producers in the world. They also brought in Ernest Cline, the original author, to write the screenplay, which is a pretty interesting fact, as well as Zach Penn. The film stars, I guess, not a star-studded cast like you'd expect for a movie that got the reviews that this did. Ty Sheridan, Olivia Cooke, Lena Waithe, TJ Miller, Simon Pegg. A lot of those aren't household names, but they all did their job really well in this movie. We've already said that the film takes place in 2045, a bit more specific than just the 2040s like the book. Though the plot still follows really the same overall plot. It's a time when everyone uses virtual reality software, which is called Oasis, to escape the boring aspects of life that they sort of face in the futuristic era that they live in. The advantage over the film compared to the book is the fact that you see what this world is like and you see all the references.
I guess that's the big difference between the two mediums, is that movies allow them to show you exactly how they picture it. And with Ernest Cline working on both the book and the movie, what you're seeing in the film is his version of what's inside his head when he was writing this, which is so important because there's no ambiguity. And obviously with all the technology, you see like these really amazing scenes. All the action is really planned out and detailed with it. With the books, however, you really get the freedom to personalize the content to your own imagination as a reader. So nobody tells you what you have to imagine. You get to decide everything for yourself, how they look, how the fight scenes play out, all of that kind of stuff. And you create your own personalized feel with the book. So Kav, you've read the book and you saw the movie as well. How do you think they compare to each other?
Just like any adaptation from a book to a film, I've always got a preference as to one over the other. And in this case, I love the movie. It was a brilliant movie. But again, I love my books, so I do have a preference for the book. And simply because with a book, you tend to get a lot more in-depth, a lot more details, instead of just the visual effects of everything that you get with a movie. And especially with the movies, you got to get you got to get the audience interested. You got to get them not bored and you don't bog down the story. You got to always keep the action going. Whereby a book, you take your time a bit more. Now, just like that, with the book itself, it introduces the world a bit more. It starts off with Wade as a student in school, tells you a lot more about the world itself and how the kids grow up in that society. It tells you that the schools themselves are, for example, the schools themselves are set up in the oasis. So kids go physically into the virtual reality world, and then they go into a class, and then in that class they then go through to their field trips and wherever they need to go, but everything is virtual. Probably about the first 100 or so pages of the book, we are introduced to this world, and Wade, protagonist of the story, is introducing the world to us, is explaining everything, how everything works, and that's how we are introduced to the world. Unlike the movie itself, which basically throws us straight into the action. We don't know a lot about what's happening, but we see the excitement of the story immediately, as opposed to the book, which slowly builds it up before it gets into the nitty-gritty of the book. It's the story itself.
I guess that's the thing, is that a movie always has a time constraint on it. You know, it has to be at least an hour and a half, but when you get past 2 hours, 2.5 hours, you know, a lot of attention spans are dropping off at that point, and not many movies will go that far. Whereas with a book, and particularly any kind of fantasy or science fiction, you expect them to be a really long book. You don't want a short one. If you got one that was 100 pages, you'd probably pick it up and go, what is this? Whereas if you pick one up that's 500 pages, you're like, oh, this has to be a good book. There's got to be a lot of detail in it. And that's the advantage of the book, is that they can tell you as much or as little as they want to, but a good book will really go into those depths that a movie can never, ever reach. Corey, you watched the movie. You've heard a little bit about the book. Did the movie make you want to go read the book?
Yeah, no, 100%, especially Kav's description of the book, because I genuinely have very, very little knowledge of the book opposed to the movie, which is really depressing because I am a huge book person. But just from Kav's description, the reviews I've read, everything about it, I am 100% going to pick up the book to line it up with the movie eventually.
Perfect. Well, with this whole storyline, the big draw card is the whole nostalgia and the cultural references. So there's a lot from the 70s, the 80s, but there's everything up to almost present day. They really did try and include a lot more, even past where the book had actually already included, because the movie's obviously a lot later. You've got films, shows, music, toys, games, anime, comics. You've got everything in there. Spielberg estimated that he got about 80% of the copyrighted elements that he wanted. Let's talk about a couple of them, because that's the big thing about this movie. Let's go with you, Corey. You're up first. What's the first one that you remember?
It's always got to be the Iron Giant, the big gun of the main fight of the movie. The Iron Giant, weirdly enough, isn't actually the referenced character in the book for that, I guess, part of the story. But due to, like you said, only 80% of the copyright material being claimed, they substituted him in, and I thought it was an incredible thing. Same with Battletoads, Street Fighter, the DeLorean from Back to the Future. There's a lot of really, I guess, mainstream references in this that are easily noticed.
Kav, what about you? What comes first to your mind when you think about this movie or book is the one thing that you would tell people about?
Well, in terms of the movie itself, obviously, you know, the DeLorean plays such a huge part in this movie that you notice it immediately as one of the pop culture references in here. To me, it was more the gaming side of things that I was more interested in. So a lot of the old games are referenced. One of the things that is, weirdly enough, not as referenced enough in the movie as it was in the book is just Dungeons and Dragons. Because the Dungeons and Dragons plays a huge part in the book itself. Well, I suppose not to spoil the movie itself or the book. One of the first challenges in the game is to find the key. The main thing in the movie is the race, which plays out at the beginning of the movie. The book is considerably different. That one is more centered around Dungeons and Dragons. So not to mention too much what happens there. Dungeons and Dragons plays a huge part of that. And not only that, it also plays a huge part in this beginning of the whole Oasis environment. And again, the book has more time to explain all of that a lot better, whereby probably Dungeons and Dragons wouldn't translate in with today's modern audience as much. That's probably why they wouldn't have used that quite as much as I would have wanted them to do.
Yeah, and I guess to explain to the audience who haven't seen the movie, the premise, as we mentioned, was about an Easter egg hunt where essentially James Halliday has created the Oasis and everyone goes and pretty much escapes their reality by going into a virtual reality. And upon his death, he said that there is 3 challenges. If you beat these challenges, you'll get keys, get all 3 keys, you inherit everything. So the first challenge is this race in the movie. And the big thing about that is vehicle-based references. So you've got the DeLorean from Back to the Future, which is what Wade drives. But then you see all the other cool ones. You get to see, the Kira bike in there. You get to see the Batmobile. What were some of the other ones, guys?
The Mach 5 from Speed Racer was one of my favorites.
Definitely. There was the light cycle, which is from Tron, I believe, was also in there. Yeah. So quite a lot of things.
I do actually have a question, Kav. Like you said, because like I said, I haven't read the book, but the fact that they changed it from Dungeons and Dragons for the first challenge to a race involving characters like the Mach 5, like the DeLorean, like Donkey Kong, those sort of characters that are really well known. Do you think that was solely because you don't think Dungeons and Dragons would have translated, or do you think it was to, I guess, push more well-known characters into the story?
A bit of both, I think. When you are making a movie and you want to keep your target audience engaged, obviously. So by using more modern references, then certainly, you keep your audience more engaged. They're more likely to be looking around to see what else they can see, what they'll notice, what they relate to. And using something as, I suppose, old as Dungeons and Dragons, that doesn't quite resonate with everybody. I mean, a lot of us nerds, if you will, would certainly relate to that. Quite a number of us have played Dungeons and Dragons, so we've played those kind of games before, but it's a slightly older reference that wouldn't resonate quite as well with today's audience. Whereby if you put in characters from Overwatch, or if you put in the DeLorean in there, it's more likely to resonate with people. So I think that's definitely the reason why they would have done that. Also, with Dungeons and Dragons, that would be more of a slower paced thing. It does, by putting it into a race, it makes it more exciting. That immediate, not sense of danger, sense of urgency, I suppose, in the whole race of it all, is more exciting for a movie audience than somebody running through a dungeon and playing a Dungeons and Dragons game type of thing.
That's one thing that I'd like to talk about is the target audience for this movie. The book is very known as being a teen style book. Is that right, Kav?
Yeah, I think you more like young adult type book, unlike some of the it wasn't aimed at older audiences and such. Uh, Purely based on the, I suppose, the gaming aspects of things, you'd think younger adults would be more likely to be into that kind of thing. Whereby I suppose the movie is, I suppose, trying to hit everybody. It's just trying to draw everybody into to the movie, so it would keep it more exciting and more interesting to try to hit as many people as possible.
Yeah, they definitely would want to hit as many target audiences as possible, but there was still that teen feel to the movie as well. And when I think about the choices that they made and the references that they chose, whilst they stayed true enough to the original material, and when Ernest wrote that, like surely a lot of that would have to resonate to what he would have liked as a teen, whereas creating a movie like that, you have to cater to, the producers and all that. So when I think about the references they chose, I feel like they chose to target it to that, say, 15 to 30-year-old audience and the references that those people would be more familiar with, where whilst Dungeons & Dragons is popular amongst all ages, it's not as popular as things like Overwatch and Fortnite and things like that these days. So I feel like a lot of the choices for cameos would have based around who the target audience was for the movie, even though they're still trying to hit all audiences.
I do 100% agree with that, especially considering there's little details about the story that sort of make you think. When Klein wrote the book, there wasn't a sense of this is my target age group. He wanted something that hit every different generation who have played different video games, or in the form of Dungeons & Dragons, different board games. He actually made a reference to the fact that the creator of Oasis in the story actually has the same birthday as Klein himself. So he made it so that the creator was supposed to be a reflection of him and his, in his words, nerdy-ass friends. So yeah, I don't think he specifically had a target audience. So calling it a teen book is a bit of a stretch when there's nothing, I guess, in place to say that was the target. But I do get where you're coming from, because a lot of especially in the movie adaptation, the book only targets 70s and 80s references. The movie stretches into the 90s and the 2000s. So I think the movie adaptation was more targeted to my generation, as opposed to the audience for the book who actually used to play Atari and Adventure and Joust and all those sort of games.
Yes, I mean, I agree with you there as well, because, like, as I said, the book itself, the way as you read the book, I suppose the language that's used in the book, it's more, you'd consider it more like young adult type language. It's not sophisticated language that you'd think you'd expect it for, like, adult books, so to speak. And that's why I say that it feels as though you're reading a young adult thing. But in terms of the references in the book, they're more, as you said, mostly 70s and 80s references. Very few, even though the book itself is set in the 2040s, very few things referenced that are in the current times, if you will. Most of them are in the 80s, and most of them are, old games that we, like me being an older gentleman, of course, games that I used to play as a kid. And so I'm in my 40s now, but when I reference the books, when I read the book, all those references make sense, and they feel like aimed at somebody like myself, because I was young back in the 80s and I can relate to all those things. So definitely, although the book feels like it's a young adult book, the references in it would definitely suggest that they're targeted to people who are of that generation like myself.
Yeah, exactly. One of the interesting reviews I read of it was actually a Kotaku review, and the criticism that they directed at it kind of threw me off a little bit, because they had a go at the movie for not including futuristic references in the movie. So all the references obviously are targeted up until today's time. None of them are from, say, this year through to the 2040 timeline where the movie is set. And I thought that was a very interesting thing to criticize the movie on, as the whole purpose of the book gives you a whole nostalgia feel, and you're not going to feel nostalgic about the future. And the other thing was I saw Steven Spielberg actually address criticism like that, where he had actually considered throwing in a few references. I think it was he wanted to put in a Titanic 5 just as a bit of a joke to kind of have a go at people who probably would actually expect that kind of thing. And I thought that was actually quite funny that he'd thought about doing it and still chose not to with it. What do you guys think? Do you think that there should have been future references, or do you think that they were right in keeping it to the nostalgia you expected?
I agree with them keeping it to the nostalgia 100%, although I didn't know about that Titanic reference that he was going to slip in there, but that's hilarious, the fact that he was going to just put a random Titanic 5 line in there. But in saying that as well, a lot of the references that are put in actually are futuristic references to a point, like Overwatch. Overwatch is set in the future. So to make it a current reference as opposed to a 2030 reference or whenever the game is supposed to be set, you can't obviously reference anything in the future. It hasn't happened. So you kind of have to stick with what you know. And the fact that Spielberg is actually defending the movie, especially considering a lot of people were expecting it to be filled with Steven Spielberg references. He intentionally took a lot of his references out of the source material for the movie adaptation because he didn't want it to be about him. He wanted it to be about people reliving old days that they remember and feeling good about seeing them in a modern way.
I feel like that's a very interesting point about him taking out his own references, because obviously Steven Spielberg is one of the most beloved, directors in the history of all movies ever. To remove those references, you can see both sides of it. He obviously doesn't want to go around jerking himself off over how great he is. But on the other token, we all love him. We all want to see these kind of things. So has he done us a disservice by not including in the great things that he has done? What do you guys think?
No, I think that is a good thing because, as you said, he doesn't want to just be, you don't want the movie just to be about himself. The fact that he was inclusive in getting other references in there was, I think, a good service to the movie. Not only that, I wanted to touch up a little bit about the nostalgia aspect of things, saying about not using more modern references. I mean, the book itself specifically says that people are tired of living the real world. You know what I mean? They don't want to be reminded of the drudgery of their current existence. So by going to more older, nostalgic feeling, references and things like that, people feel better about themselves. Like, if you're down in your life, you're not gonna try to keep on going with the things that are keeping you down in life. You're gonna try to remember a better time. So yeah, you'll be having older references, older nostalgic things of better times, if you will. And that would certainly be the reasons why you wouldn't be referencing something that's more modern.
Definitely. And I think the big thing is in the movie, I don't know if you get the feel in the book, but I just remember when you see the real world in the movie and just how much of a junkyard, Watts lives in. Like, the place that he lives in there's no money there. There's nothing there. All the money goes to the technology to live in this other place. And seeing the difference between the two, the virtual reality and the real world, you can 100% understand why these people want to escape what they're living. But I mean, the question is, what becomes of that? They're escaping their lives so much that they're not fixing the problems that they've got. So where do you draw the line on that kind of, aspect?
I think that was one of the main issues with the Oasis invention to begin with in the story, is the fact that it is worldwide and it is the most popular thing. Every single person you see in the movie, and I'd say it'd be the same in the book, have the device. They're all using it. And like you said, he lives in what is basically a hole. Like, there is nothing there. Even the area where he sets up his Oasis station is in the back of a junk heap car that he set it up in. There is nothing else there. But in saying that, I don't think the invention of the Oasis would have changed much. In this futuristic society that they depict in the movie, it seems to be a very fine line between the rich and poor, in a sense of the main villain in the movie runs a giant company, and if you look at the facilities that they have, it's a 2045 facility. You look at any other part of that movie, the rest of the world is crumbling. There's nothing. So, like Kav said, they take the Oasis to escape from that rundown world. And I get your point that they could be trying to fix it as opposed to it, but I think the feeling I get from it is that it's too far gone for them to fix, so they use the Oasis as an escape.
Kav, how did the book give you a feel of this world? Did you feel how it looked in the movie? When you saw the movie, did you go, that's exactly how I imagined these people living? Or did you think, actually, I thought it might have been a little bit different?
Oh no, that's exactly how I felt. That the movie depicted that brilliantly for me. It's exactly the feeling I had when I was reading the book. That this world, or the way people feel about this world or their world, is that it's too far gone. The resources of the world have been used up. There's nothing else that can, they're not building any new things. There's nothing they can do about their situation. So rather than try to fix it or try to make things better, they just regress into this game environment and try to live a better life, if you will. But obviously, the problems in the world still exist. Things are not getting better. And then the point is, where do you draw the line? Who's going to take up the reins, so to speak, and who's going to try to get things moving forward again?
Well, speaking of better and worse realities, my favorite part was probably the second challenge for the movie, which was, of course, The Shining. Now, obviously, I assume you guys have seen the movie The Shining and the sheer horror that you experienced whilst watching that movie.
Oh, 100%. Like, I love horror movies, and Stanley Kubrick's entire depiction of The Shining it's a cult classic when it comes to horror movies. Whether you don't particularly enjoy slow-paced build-up and those sort of things, it is still such a good movie. And the fact that they've translated it into basically just scenes from the movie, but with this new element of the characters from the Oasis just entering it, is extremely fascinating to me, just how well that it was pulled off.
For me, the big thing was the horror element. Like when they entered that, and as soon as they enter it, you know exactly where you are. For me, you'd gone from this kind of PG style, fun, loving adventure, and then all of a sudden, like as soon as they entered that, I felt horror. Like I instantly went back to the original movie and I knew exactly what was coming. And that was the thing, as they're walking along in a comical manner, because they have no idea what they've walked into, and you feel that horror coming, and that it was a mix of humor and horror and nostalgia, and everything just bubbled into one go. And they did really well at not turning this movie into a horror piece. It's scary, but it's fun at the same time, and they make light of what happens into it, even though what's happening is still quite scary. And for me, that was such a huge and amazing experience during that whole movie. Now, the interesting thing is that that's not in the book at all. It was actually meant to be Blade Runner, I believe, Kav, if I read correctly.
Yes, there was a Blade Runner reference in the book itself. And again, not to go too much into details to spoil it for everybody, but yes, the scene itself is changed. What I found interesting about the scene itself in the movie was the fact that it was, here's a book, here's a movie adapting a book, and then here's the same movie adapting another movie which is adapted from another book, which for me was more, because I'm an avid reader, so that was just an interesting fact in there. And it was, as you said, as you both said, it is a very well done scene. So I wasn't actually unhappy that they had substituted the Blade Runner reference with this Shining reference. It was actually a very well done scene. Loved it thoroughly.
Without trying to, I guess, inflate Steven Spielberg's ego even more than I already have this podcast, the fact that the reason it was alternated to The Shining specifically was, once again, Steven Spielberg. It was a paying homage to Kubrick, the director from the Shining movie, who obviously were friends in real life. So when the Blade Runner was unavailable to take due to copyright reasons, that was apparently the only movie he would substitute it for, which I thought was a really nice nod from director to director.
And that's the thing, I guess he showed his own passion. He's friends with these people for a reason. He loves their work. He's very passionate about what he does, but he also sees other people being passionate. And The Shining, like I said, is just a very passionate movie. It was so well done and a lot of love put into it that you can see why he chose a movie like that to throw in there. And it's such a fine line. Everything he had to do with this movie is such a fine line. And putting a horror movie into an action, fun kind of movie, once again, such a fine line that he did so incredibly well. And the humor of other people trying to do what Wade is trying to, to unlock the Easter egg, and watching them fail, watch this big corporation, just send people after people walk into this horror scene, and the humor that come from all the misfortune that they get. Like, for me, like, I can't say it enough, that really blew my mind.
See, I feel like Klein is just as passionate as Spielberg. Maybe the reason he picked him as a director and producer, not 100% sure, but Klein actually 10 months after the book was released announced that the book itself was an Easter egg. There was an Easter egg somewhere in the book, and it was similar to the plot of the story, which I found really interesting, and the fact that he must have taken so much to set this up and so much planning. So what it was is basically the Easter egg in the book led to a series of video games and a bunch of stages similar to the movie with the keys. One of the games that I saw that was mentioned was Ultimate Collector Garage Sale, which might be my age showing, but I have no idea what it is. The conclusion to the event was August 1st. It was when the final stage was discovered. It took 8 days for them to finally beat the final stage, which was to set a world record on either the Classic Arcade or the Atari 2600 console system, which is obviously very, very similar to the movie. Eventually, the contest was won by someone named Craig Queen, set a record on the game Joust for the Atari. Day that he won, it was brought on to a TV show called X-Play, and Klein was there to meet him, spoke to him, congratulated him on winning, and then actually gave him a DeLorean, exact same model, style, color, everything as the one that was seen in Ready Player One, and the source material obviously for that, Back to the Future.
Do you know if it was a functional one? Like, could he drive this, or?
Yeah, it was a full-blown drivable DeLorean.
Wow.
Can you imagine just driving down the streets in that, just cruising along like, yeah, I'm in the DeLorean. What are you going to do? Imagine if he couldn't drive. Imagine if all this time he'd like lived in a big city, caught the buses and trains, wins a car, and he's like, oh shit, I don't know how to drive it.
And I got it by winning a video game.
Well, I guess the one thing we haven't talked about, guys, is the actual characters. We've talked a little bit about them in passing reference, but there's so many references in the actual characters themselves. So I guess if we start with Halliday himself, I'm not too sure if you guys are aware, Halliday in the movie is a big fan of the 80s culture. That's why he does everything. But he becomes this character that guides them and really leads them on this journey. And it's very similar to, or it's inspired by, I should say, Willy Wonka and the whole Charlie and the Chocolate Factory storyline. Essentially, Halliday is playing Wonka whilst all the kids going through the factory, finding all these Easter eggs in that. Some of the personalities that like they took off Howard Hughes, Richard Garriott, and that, he's referred to so many things to create all these different characters. Do you guys have like a favorite character in there that, or was there any references from the characters that you noticed stand out?
I, just because of the sort of inner nerd in me, the Wade Watts alter ego name of Parsifal, which is a direct reference to the Arthurian knight from the Quest from the Holy Grail. I thought that was really interesting, as well as the fact that he's 18 when he finds the copper key. And in the book, which I've read a review mentioning this, I haven't actually read the book as I mentioned, but his username at the virtual high school that he attends is Wade3. So you can see the slight creativity difference between the two names that he uses.
What about you, Kav? Did you have a particular character that you thought had a particularly great reference, or was there anything that stood out for you?
Yeah, I suppose the female lead, or the love interest in this case, Artemis, which obviously refers to the Greek goddess of the hunt. Now that one is all, obviously it's a great reference, and I like Greek mythology and all that stuff, and so it was actually a good reference. She's one of my favorite characters in the book as well as the movie itself.
Yeah, I definitely found that the way that they chose both Parsifal and Artemis really set where the characters was going, and instantly you get the reference to what they're talking about, and it tells you what the characters are going to do for this book. And I find that's a really great mechanic for setting up the whole storyline without having to do anything itself. Just the mere mention of it, completely throws you to where you're going. For me, I really liked Ogden Morrow in this storyline. He's not the forefront character, but he's always there and he's always being part of everything. And the interesting thing about that is that he was actually inspired, and his relationship with Halliday was inspired by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, which I thought was a really cool little fact for it. He had Jobs being, this charismatic tech leader. And yeah, I just thought that references like that were really, really good, as opposed to, like how they compare that to Nolan Sorrento.
Yeah, no, that's a very fair point. And I like the fact you sort of mentioned Sorrento as well, just because of the polar opposite between Ogden and Sorrento in storyline wise, but even the point of the reference is very different, where he got the idea for the character, whereas like you said, Ogden was based on Steve Jobs. Nolan Sorrento was based on Nolan Bushnell, the founder basically of Atari, the game company in which the main console in the story is based on, which he actually did come out and say afterwards that it wasn't because he thought Nolan was a bad guy. It was meant to be a subtle tribute. But with the main ending to the story, I don't feel like that's 100% true, because there's a little bit of a shot fired in terms of where the story leads and in basically involving Atari.
Yes, definitely, as referenced in the book itself as well, and where the character of Sorrento is based, and the whole book itself, the whole Easter egg, the hidden message in the game, that all stems from the culture or the reported culture of Atari back in the day, whereby in this case, the designer of the game Adventure, his name was Warren Robinet. He designed Adventure, and at that point in time, the culture in Atari was that the game developers themselves did not get any mention or recognition for their work. Atari took pretty much all the credit for everything. In fact, I suppose a bit of a fact there is that that kind of culture in the end actually led to creation of Activision, which is another fun fact, but that's for another day. Now, Robinet actually created an Easter egg in the game Adventure, whereby once you found the Easter egg, it actually showed you his name and gave him, I suppose, the recognition that he was looking for, which is all stems from that whole culture at Atari.
What's funny that you mentioned the fact that they would basically see these designers as basically non-existent. They were a number to Atari. They weren't a person. Actually does stem back to the story in the fact that all of the people that work under Sorrento are called Sixers. That is because of the fact that they don't have a name, they don't have an identity, they're all based off of a six-digit number. So in my opinion, there's no way that that whole plot line involving Sorrento wasn't intended to be, I guess, a less dramatic, but an attack at the creator of Atari. There are so many things there that point to him being this evil character, not even just in the story, but in real life, that I guess it's hard to not draw the comparison between the two.
Yeah, and I believe the reason he would have said that it wasn't supposed to be an attack or a dig at the real life Nolan is probably just to avoid illegal action, really, because
you're probably 100% right on that.
Yeah, you don't want to be sued for that, but definitely it is a statement, or I suppose a narrative that just says that this is what was happening at Atari, this is the kind of culture they had there, and yeah, pretty much they were the bad guys, and this is how the developers freed themselves or could try to get away from that and get the recognition they were looking after. And the whole plot of this book slash movie stems from that as well.
Do you reckon there's an Easter egg somewhere in the book that just says Nolan Bushnell is a dick?
Would not surprise me. Would not surprise me. The book itself does contain quite a lot of hidden things in there, and it would not surprise me if something like that is in there.
My issue is I don't think he would have put it as an Easter egg. I think it would have been on the front cover, considering how blatant it is in the storyline.
That's so true. That's so true.
The 10th anniversary edition of the book, that's the cover. All right, well, we might wrap it up there before we go into too many spoilers or that. We've seemed to have covered pretty much everything. The movie, a lot of nostalgia. The graphics are great. You know, everything you wanted in that kind of movie. Guys, what would you rate it out of 10? Corey?
Yeah, so 100%. I'd give the movie a 9.5 out of 10. It's so well put together, and I know I've mentioned him a lot, but Steven Spielberg is such a good director and producer that it's hard to give the movie anything less than that.
Well, for me, I'll give it probably 8 out of 10. That's not because it's a bad movie, not at all. The movie, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I love the adaptation. It translates very, very well to film. My only issue is that I love my books. I love the book itself, and some of the changes in the movie I didn't quite agree with. So, but otherwise, generally speaking, it was brilliantly done, and 8 out of 10 is what I give it.
On that, what do you give the book in your opinion, Kav?
Oh, the book, I'll definitely give that 9 out of 10 because I quite enjoyed the book. I can't complain about the book at all. I quite enjoyed it. It's one of my favorite books I've read ever. So 9 out of 10 for sure.
See, I would give the movie probably a 9 out of 10. It's definitely not a perfect movie, but I feel like there's two different ways of viewing it. If you're into pop culture and nostalgia and that, it's probably a 10 out of 10 movie. And that's how I felt when I watched it because I'm very into it. But for someone who's not into that or hasn't experienced it, all the references pass you by, it probably drops to something like a 7 or even a 6. The overall plot of the movie isn't the most in-depth one, and I felt like there's a few check boxes with the romance and different little things about that irked me a little bit. But in terms of references, if you just sit there to watch references, it's I don't know if there is another movie that's like that out there.
Especially considering how strict everything is now with taking content that isn't yours and that sort of stuff. To have that many references and just that much nostalgia packed into one movie says a lot for both Spielberg's, I guess, connections in the industry to be able to get them, as well as the fact that they were able to put that many references into a hour and a half long movie, and it all fits. It's not patchy, it's not jumpy, it all fits.
Yeah, that's true, and I quite enjoyed, as I said, half the fun of the movie is, just trying to look at all the references that are included in the movie. So it is, from that point of view, it's definitely quite enjoyable and definitely 10 out of 10 in that sense. So it's, it's a solid movie. Go watch it if you haven't seen it already.
Perfect, guys. Well, we might wrap it up there. This has been an episode about Ready Player One. Read the book, go see the movie when it comes out on DVD and Blu-ray. Obviously, I'm Daniel. Corey, thank you so much for joining us on your first episode.
No worries at all. Hopefully everyone enjoys hearing my voice and welcome me back again.
And Kav, thank you as always for joining. I know you've been a bit sick, so thank you for being back on.
No problem, man. As I said, one of the biggest things I wanted to do this year is to be on more of these podcasts as much as possible. Still not feeling 100% today. However, it's good to be back on again, and hopefully I'll be on in future episodes.
Well, I can tell you I love having you more on these episodes, so thank you so much. For everyone listening, if you want to follow us on the different social medias from Twitter, Facebook, Reddit is probably our best one to actually have a chat to us about. But definitely hit us up in the comments. If you have any ideas for episodes or anything that you want to do, please let us know. We are actually looking at starting a Patreon in the future, so keep an eye out for that. We will announce all the details over both Facebook and Reddit. If you have any suggestions for that, we've got a specific thread for it as well. So thank you very much for everyone for listening to this episode. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you on the next episode.